So I want to leave you with one final thing, with one final quality, something that I noticed from backable leaders, great leaders, is what I call the game of now. The game of now. They didn't play the game of someday. They played the game of now. So I think 3 words tend to hold us back from the game of now. And those 3 words are, I'm not ready. I'm not ready to run with that idea. I'm not ready to step into that leadership role. I'm not ready to speak my mind. But the one thing that I realized across all the leaders that I studied is that none of them were really ready. 3 friends from design school were not ready to start Airbnb. A fintech executive was not ready to start SpaceX. A 15-year-old from Stockholm, Sweden was not ready to build an environmental movement, and yet today Greta Thunberg is Time Magazine's youngest ever person of the year. There were setbacks, there were mistakes, there were failures along the way, but they played the game of now. And one of my favorite game of now stories comes from this woman, Damayanti Hingorani. Now, Damayanti Hingorani's story is pretty remarkable, and Time Magazine did a big write-up on her because she grew up as a refugee right on the border of India and Pakistan. No running water, no electricity, but she did something really, really remarkable. She taught herself how to read. And the first book that she read from cover to cover was a story about Ford Motor Company. Well, after reading the book, she says to herself, I one day want to become an engineer with Ford. A very unlikely dream for somebody living in those conditions. But her parents get behind the dream. They save every penny they have. She gets on a boat to the United States. She gets a scholarship to Oklahoma State University. The day after she graduates, she gets herself to Detroit, Michigan, and she even finds her way into a room with a hiring manager. Really, really remarkable, right? But the problem was this. When the hiring manager comes into the room, he looks at her resume, and then he looks at her application, and he says, wait a second, are you applying for the job of an engineer? And she says, yeah. And he says, well, look, I'm sorry. We don't really have any female engineers working here right now. Imagine that. 1967. The company has thousands of engineers on staff, but not a single one of them that he knows of is a woman. So in that moment, Damayanti Hingorani can feel all of her dreams slipping away. All of the work, all of the sacrifice that it took for her to get to this country, for her to get to this city, to get to this very room. She picks up her resume, she picks up her purse, and she begins to walk out. But that's when she decides to play the game of now. She turns around, she looks at the hiring manager, and she flips him from an outsider into an insider. She says, look, you don't have any female engineers on staff, then do yourself a favor and hire me now, because things are changing. So let's change them together. Let's do this together. And it was in this meeting, in that moment, that this hiring manager is so inspired that he decides that he's going to go out and he's going to fight with his bosses. He's going to fight with his colleagues. He's going to inspire the people around him. And in 1967, Damayanti Hingorani becomes Ford Motor Company's first female engineer. Pretty amazing story, right? And it only gets better from there, because she's driving her car now outside of Detroit, Michigan, and her car breaks down, ironically. So she walks to a local phone booth, because they had phone booths back then. And now she's a newcomer to the country. She doesn't know many people. So she literally opens up the phone book to the A's and thinks of the most common Indian name that she can think of. In the A's, that's Agarwal. So she literally calls up the first Agarwal, and someone answers on the first ring. Only it wasn't Mr. Agarwal, it was Mr. Agarwal's roommate, Damayanti Hingorani's future husband and my father. Here they are, getting married. Yeah, at a local place in Metro Detroit, a traditional Indian wedding, and they've been married for the past 53 years. In fact, they live in Florida, and they happen to actually be here with us today. Mom and Dad. They had two sons, my brother Sanjay and me. As you can tell, Sanjay's a little bit older than I am. Well, the one thing that they passed on to the both of us was the game of now. Not the game of someday, but to play the game of now. So Sanjay grew up to become a doctor, and one day he had this idea that maybe a doctor could be on television reporting the news. So they said, play the game of now. So Dr. Suneel Gupta just celebrated 20 years at CNN this past year. Now, I have a mom who's the first female engineer at Ford. I have a brother who is a neurosurgeon and a medical correspondent, and I am the face of failure. But remember when I told you that there were some certain people early on when this article came out who told me that failure is not the opposite of success, but failure is a pathway to success. Well, those were my parents. They are my collaborator, they are my coach, they are my cheerleader, and yes, they are my cheddar. But they're also a reminder of the extraordinary impact that we can have on the people around us, even perfect strangers. If a middle manager from suburban Michigan hadn't taken a chance on a refugee from the other side of the world, well, then I wouldn't be here right now with you. I wouldn't be here to tell you her story. So as we leave here today, let's not just aim to make ourselves backable, but let's find good people, even if they look different than us, and let's help them become backable. Because sometimes the easiest way to make your mark on the world is to take a chance on someone else.